So, in our previous lesson, we talked about the foundations of American democracy, specifically in terms of the Declaration of Independence, the ideas that are found within the Declaration of Independence, and how that pertains to American political culture. In this lesson, we're going to talk about theories of democracy. When the writers of the Constitution are going to sit down and start framing this new government, they're going to have to compromise between three main competing models or theories of representative democracy. Remember that we said that representative democracy is this system of democracy in which we as citizens are going to vote and elect officials that we believe are going to carry out our interests in the policymaking process, and we're able to hold those elected officials accountable through free and fair elections. So let's get into the three different theories of democracy. So the first model is participatory democratic theory. And this is a theory that widespread political participation is essential for democratic government. So this theory is going to focus on popular sovereignty. Remember that we said that popular sovereignty is the idea that the rule comes from the people. So the power of the government comes from the people. The people rule. And that governmental authority should be in the hands of individuals selected by the people. So the authority of the government is going to be based on the will of the majority. So think about popular vote. Okay, so what the majority wants. This type of democracy is going to emphasize wide-ranging participation of citizens as individuals rather than as group members or powerful elites. So this theory emphasizes the importance of citizen involvement, and citizen involvement can take many different shapes. So that could be political discussions, signing petitions, attending town hall meetings, contacting officials, participating in protests. So getting people involved in the government. So in order for a democracy to function the way that it should, individual citizens need to be involved. The next theory is pluralist theory, and this is a theory of democracy that emphasizes the role of groups in the policy-making process. So one of the best ways to influence the political process is by joining a group of like-minded citizens. So today we see this by the large number of interest groups that are active in influencing policy because they're concerned about a particular issue. There's thousands of interest groups in the United States. So the NRA is going to be interested in anything that has to do with guns, gun laws. Then there's groups like the ACLU, AARP. All right, so interest groups are going to try to influence policy in terms of how it pertains to their particular group, their particular interests. Groups are going to have ways of influencing the government. Okay, so these interest groups can impact policy by donating to campaigns, lobbying or contacting officials, testifying at hearings, providing research, filing lawsuits, helping to write laws. So interest groups as a whole can have a really big influence on the policymaking process. And part of that is because groups that are weak in one resource, maybe they don't have a ton of financial backing, are going to have strengths in other resources. So this theory emphasizes this role of groups and how interest groups can play a role in the policymaking process. And the final model or theory is the elitist theory. And this is the theory that the elites, so the educated and the wealthy, have a disproportionate amount of influence in the policymaking process. So this idea that government authority in a democracy tends to migrate to the hands of a small group of people instead of popular participation, which we talked about in the first model, so that participatory model. So according to the elitist theory, a small minority with the most power is going to control government and politics, and elected officials are going to be heavily influenced by wealthy interest groups. So groups that have more money are going to have more influence in the government. So many members of Congress, for example, have a net worth of a lot of money, whereas very few members are going to come from a working class background. Okay, so this is what it means by elitist theory. So if we go back, how can we see these theories or these models in action in our government today? Well, first, with participatory democratic theory, the Constitution's method for selecting members of the House of Representatives, has always been by popular vote. So this is an example of participatory theory and how the majority can play a role in democracy. In pluralist theory, we can see that as the different branches of government, power is spread between those different branches. It's also spread between the national and state governments. So there's lots of ways for interest groups to influence policy. There's lots of doors that they can go to. So maybe they can talk to someone in state government. Maybe they're going to try to influence Congress. Okay, so there's different ways for them to try to influence government. And then last, elitist theory. This idea can be seen in the Electoral College. So when we vote for president, we're not actually voting for president, we're voting for electors who then in turn vote for president. So this is how you can see elitist theory in action. So moving on to institutions, systems, and power. So in forming a government, there's two questions that have to be resolved. So as they're framing the Constitution and starting to put together this new government, these two questions have to be resolved. How much power will the government have? And how is that power going to be distributed? So the Constitution is going to form the basis of the nation's government and establishes the framework of political institutions. And what we're talking about with political institutions is going to be the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. So those three different branches of government, and you can look at these here. So the legislative branch makes the laws, executive carries out the laws, the judicial branch interprets the law. So to protect Americans' fundamental rights, it's also going to limit the power of the national government. So the national government isn't the only system of power in the United States. State governments are also going to have power. The United States is a constitutional republic, which is a democratic system with elective representatives in which the Constitution is the supreme law. Americans are going to elect representatives to make the most of the laws and policy to make most of the laws and policies of the nation rather than voting on them directly. Limits are going to be placed on the power of government to prevent it from infringing on people's rights. So, we have a constitutional republic, and that is going to come from all of those foundations that we talked about in the previous lesson. And that is where we're going to stop with this lesson.